My name is Nora Vance, and I am 36 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood in the soaring white marble atrium of the Marble and Gilt, the most obscenely expensive restaurant in Brooklyn's Dumbo district, holding two stacked bakery boxes filled with tiny, intricate white chocolate tartlets. I had spent 16 hours baking them with my own hands for my younger sister's baby shower. Nearby, a hostess in a fitted charcoal blazer checked her iPad twice, swiped down a digital guest manifest 3 times, and confirmed with a rehearsed smile of polished pity that there was no chair assigned to my name. My sister Chloe looked up from her peach mimosa across the velvet-draped dining room. Her fingers, heavy with diamond pave, stroked the chiffon curve of her empire waist dress. "Why don't you try that dirty pub across the cobblestones, Nora?" she said, her voice carrying easily over the muted hum of a harpist playing softly in the corner. "I hear it's much more your speed." My mother Eleanor lifted her crystal flute, her fresh manicure catching the track lighting. "It suits you perfectly, sweetheart," she added, her lips curling into that delicate, practiced arch she used when dismissing dry cleaners or distant relatives. I didn't flush. I didn't drop the boxes. I looked at the two of them sitting beneath a chandelier that cost more than my first 3 commercial ovens combined, and I smiled. "I'll do that," I said. I turned on my heel and walked out the brass-rimmed double doors. What my mother and sister saw through the Marble and Gilt's floor-to-ceiling glass facade 40 seconds later drained the color from both their faces. But their expressions aren't the story. Their shock was just an overdue utility bill finally coming due. The story is what I had to choose 3 weeks after that, on a torrential Saturday night in the middle of April, on the single most critical evening of my professional life. With my entire future sitting at a banquette on one side of a swinging kitchen door and my family disintegrating in the alleyway on the other. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the quietest people in the room finally take the microphone and family secrets are served raw. If you've ever been the sibling written off as the failure, or the child who didn't fit the family prospectus, this story is for you. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, and let's go back to where it started. Because to understand the storm, you have to see the pub first. The Iron and Apron sits on Water Street, right where the Manhattan Bridge casts its long iron shadow over the cobblestones. It's housed in a 3-story red brick warehouse built in 1892, back when the Brooklyn waterfront smelled of whale oil, cheap molasses, and heavy iron rivets. The front door is thick weathered white oak painted a shade of hunter green that peeled during the Eisenhower administration and faded long before I ever turned a key in the lock. I refuse to repaint it. Patina isn't something you buy, it's something you earn by surviving. Most mornings I'm down the wooden staircase by 4:30 a.m. I live in a small loft apartment directly above the hotline, so my daily commute is exactly 14 steps. By 5 o'clock, the laminated dough for the breakfast galettes is proofing in the retarder. The stock from yesterday's roasted marrow bones is straining through cheesecloth into 80-quart stainless pots, filling the cold, quiet room with a rich, dark aroma that smells like purpose. My core crew trickles in around 6. Maya Rivera, my sous chef, is 33 years old, sharp as a ceramic paring knife, and vastly better at plating than I was at her age. Marcus Thorne, my general manager, 41, built like a fire hydrant, who speaks in short, clipped sentences, as if every word were costing him cash out of his own pocket. 14 people in total work under that roof, and every last one of them calls me chef. Here is the detail you need to understand, the piece of the puzzle that makes everything else fall into place. For nearly a decade, my family believed I worked as a night shift bartender there. My mother told her bridge club in the Upper East Side that I was still in the service industry finding my footing. She said it with a soft, mournful little sigh that invited instant sympathy. I never once corrected her, not at Thanksgiving dinners where the turkey was dry and the conversation was drier. Not at my stepfather's memorial service in Greenwich. Not at Sunday brunches in Westchester, where the linen napkins were starched stiff enough to cut glass, but the questions about my life were kept entirely off the table. There is a framed parchment certificate hanging inside my kitchen. It doesn't hang in the vestibule out front where the light is pretty. It hangs directly beside the dish pit, right where the hot steam from the Hobart sanitizer curls the bottom right corner of the frame just a little more every month. Most restaurant owners who earn one build a velvet niche for it near the front coat rack, lit up like a holy relic. Mine hangs where only the men and women who sweat over 40-pound bags of Yukon Gold potatoes can see it. You have every right to ask why a 36-year-old woman would hide the crowning achievement of her career from her own mother. I'm going to answer that. But first you have to meet the Vances. Sunday dinners at my mother's cooperative apartment on Park Avenue ran on an inflexible schedule, a strict seating hierarchy, and an unspoken script. It was a 40-minute subway ride from Dumbo to 84th Street, and I made that trip perhaps 4 or 5 times a year, which was 3 times more than I wanted, and 40 times fewer than my mother demanded for the sake of appearances. Eleanor Vance, 61, widowed, twice maintained a 9-room residence that looked less like a home and more like a catalog for an auction house that specialized in severe, unyielding antiques. Her guest list for holidays read like a regional corporate directory. My younger half-sister Chloe, 29, sat permanently at my mother's right hand. Chloe's Preston Montgomery sat beside her, wearing a brushed platinum chronograph that cost more than my walk-in freezer and speaking endlessly about seed funding, private equity, and venture rounds that were always 48 hours from closing. When my mother introduced Chloe to visitors, she used full resonant sentences and dramatic lighting. This is my youngest Chloe, who married into the Greenwich Montgomery's Preston's firm is disrupting the logistics space. When she reached me at the end of the sideboard, her voice dropped into a hushed, apologetic footnote. And this is Nora. She's in hospitality, still finding her footing, bless her. I was 35 years old at the time. My footing was anchored 3 feet deep in Brooklyn brickwork. My business was cash flow positive. My payroll cleared 14 checks every 2 weeks without fail. But the house rule at Park Avenue, enforced with passive-aggressive precision, was that we did not bring up the gritty realities of my line of work. Nobody wants to hear about greasy aprons over roast pheasant, sweetheart, my mother would purr, passing the glazed carrots. So I passed the carrots, kept my nails short, and held my tongue. You learn to do that when you've been doing it since you were 17. That particular Sunday, back in early spring, Chloe kept resting both palms flat against her abdomen and exchanging significant, secretive smiles with Preston. When dessert was brought out, some pale, store-bought lemon tart sitting on a cut crystal platter, Chloe stood up, adjusted her cashmere sweater, and announced her pregnancy. My mother's hands flew to her pearl necklace, her face instantly melting into orchestrated joy. I sat quietly with my black coffee, watching the light catch the gold rim of my saucer, and I remember a single thought popping into my head, as clear and distinct as the ring of an order bell during a Friday night rush. Whatever this party is going to cost, I am the one who will be handed the tab. I just didn't realize yet how public the payment would be. To understand why I kept my life behind a wall, you have to know about my father. Francis Ashe, Frankie Vance didn't cook with tweezers or microgreens. He worked the short order line at a Greasy Spoon diner off Queens Boulevard for 32 years. He pulled double shifts 4 days a week, his forearms patterned with pale, ladder-like burn scars that he jokingly called his commencement diplomas. Sundays were his only full days off. On Sunday mornings, he would drag a heavy wooden chair up to our apartment's tiny 2-burner stove, pull out a massive pitch-black cast-iron skillet, a 1940s Griswold with his initials FV, painstakingly scratched into the bottom of the handle with a steel file, and make galettes. Flaky lard-cut pastry folded over, whatever fruit was on sale at the corner bodega, bruised peaches, tart apples, wild blackberries. He crimped the edges shut with the tines of an old silver-plated fork and baked them until the kitchen smelled like burnt sugar and toasted butter. Neighbors from down the hall would knock without calling. The superintendent, an old Navy veteran from 2 floors down, would wander in around noon and stay until dusk. Dad fed every single one of them. And whenever my mother complained about the grocery budget or the flour dust settling on her framed prints, Dad would wink at me, brush a thumb across his flour-stained apron, and say his one golden rule: "Nora Bear, listen to me, nobody leaves my table hungry." I was 17 when his heart stopped mid-shift on a rainy Tuesday night, right there on the black rubber fatigue mats behind the diner's pickup counter. I was 49 years old, still wearing his grease-stained white skullcap. Here is the part of my life I have never spoken aloud to anyone, not even to Maya, Not even to Marcus. Within 3 weeks of the funeral, my mother erased him from the apartment. His diner uniforms were bagged and given to Goodwill. His worn leather work boots vanished. His dog-eared, sauce-stained notebooks filled with line cook shorthand were dumped into the incinerator chute. I came home from high school one afternoon and found his Griswold skillet, his prized FV skillet, sitting squarely on top of the trash pile in the alleyway curb, surrounded by damp cardboard and coffee grounds. Inside, my mother was violently scrubbing the kitchen counters with bleach, as if she were trying to sterilize the room of his memory. She didn't call it grief, she called it clearing the air so we can move forward. I stood on that curb in Queens for 20 minutes in the cold rain. Then I did the first truly defiant act of my life. I reached into that filthy garbage bin, pulled out the heavy iron pan, wrapped it tightly inside my fleece hoodie, and snuck it up the fire escape into my bedroom. I hid it under my mattress like contraband. 6 months later, when my mother casually informed me that she had used the small payout from my father's meager union life insurance to enroll me in an associate degree program for secretarial administration because no daughter of mine is going to spend her life smelling like onion grease, I nodded. I finished high school, went down to the Greyhound station at Port Authority, used 2 years of saved babysitting money to buy a one-way ticket to Chicago and left. I was 18 years old. In Chicago, I started at the very bottom, scrubbing greasy copper pots in a French bistro, where the executive chef threw sauté pans when tickets backed up, and my rent swallowed 3/4 of my bi-weekly paycheck. The Griswold skillet came with me. It sat on a plastic milk crate in a drafty studio apartment in Logan Square, where the steam radiators clanked like sledgehammers all winter long. Some weeks, when my checking account balance dropped into single digits, that 30-pound piece of black iron was the only item of value I owned in the entire world. For 11 years in Chicago, I climbed the kitchen ladder the old-fashioned way, station by station, burn by burn, garde manger, fry, grill, sauté, tourne en dessous. I called my mother on Christmas and Thanksgiving. She would ask if I was still doing that line cook phase, using the flat, patronizing tone one might use when inquiring about a prolonged case of poison ivy. I learned to speak to her in dense, non-committal fog. Just taking shifts where I can, Mom, I'd say, keeping my head down. In the professional culinary circuit, I went strictly by Chef Ash, using my father's middle name. No last name on the menus I designed. No face shots in local food blogs. When a regional culinary magazine wanted to do a feature on our restaurant, I permitted them to print a close-up photograph of my hands seasoning a rack of lamb, nothing more. People in the industry assumed I was intensely media shy. The truth was far more primitive. I had learned at a garbage curb in Queens when I was 17. Exactly what happens to the things I love when my family gets a clear look at them. If they don't value it, they mock it. If they can't control it, they throw it away. So I stopped letting them see anything. The secrecy worked. It protected me for 18 years across 3 cities and a dozen brutal kitchens. It worked right up until the day an envelope arrived in my mailbox with gold foil calligraphy across the front. I returned to New York when I was 29. I came back because my father is buried in a quiet cemetery in Flushing, and because an aging Polish immigrant named Gus Kowalski was looking for someone to run the line at his fading waterfront tavern on Water Street. Gus was 71 at the time, with arthritic knuckles the size of walnuts and a heart of pure gold. 2 years after he hired me as his head cook, he pulled 2 glass mugs of draft beer, sat down opposite me in a squeaky corner booth, and slid a set of ledger books across the scuffed mahogany. "My knees are shot nor a bear," he grunted, using my father's old nickname for me. "Buy the business. Pay me what's fair over 10 years. You've got the fire in your belly. Keep the doors open." I was 31. I went down to a local community bank, signed a small business administration loan that made my hands shake so hard I could barely form the letters of my signature, and took over the iron and apron. I didn't change the name. I didn't strip the 100-year-old pine paneling or replace the scuffed brass footrails. I updated the menu, brought in heritage pork-sourced produce from upstate farms, and raised the standard of execution until every plate leaving the pass was flawless. Gus retained ownership of the physical brick warehouse, acting as my landlord, which suited us both perfectly. And for 12 long years, first in Chicago, then in Brooklyn, I quietly funneled every spare dollar from my salary into a separate high-yield commercial savings account. It had one singular purpose: buy the building, own the land beneath my feet. Never let anyone ever again decide whether I have a right to stand in my own kitchen. Then Crestline Development Group arrived in Dumbo. You know their work even if you don't recognize the corporate holding name. They buy up historic waterfront blocks, gut the souls out of old industrial buildings, slap up floor-to-ceiling glass, and lease the spaces to high-end luxury chains. They had already purchased 3 historic structures on Water Street. Directly across the narrow cobblestones from my front door, they built their crown jewel, the Marble and Gilt. A glittering 2-story palace of white Italian marble brass fixtures, valet parking, and an 18-week waiting list populated by hedge fund managers and lifestyle influencers. In late March, Gus called me up to his small, paper-cluttered apartment above the pub. He looked tired. He slid a legal document across his kitchen table. Crestline made an unsolicited cash offer on the warehouse, Nora, he said softly. It's a big number, but I told them my chef has the right of first refusal. It's in our original letter of intent, and I honor every word I put in writing. But my son wants me out in Arizona by June. You've got 6 weeks to secure your commercial mortgage and match their baseline offer. I looked at the number. 12 years of aggressive savings sat in my investment account. It was extremely close but manageable if my bank approved the commercial property loan. I'll have the financing ready, Gus, I told him. I promise. 2 days later, Gus called again, his voice pained. Crestline had escalated. They had raised their cash offer by 20%. Now let me tell you about the framed certificate hanging beside my dish pit. A year ago, on an ordinary overcast Thursday afternoon, my cell phone rang. An unfamiliar Manhattan area code. A polite, measured voice on the line informed me that the Iron and Apron, our rustic 100-year-old tavern with the peeling green door and the scuffed floorboards, had been awarded a star in the upcoming Michelin Guide. A star for a pub that served braised beef shanks, cast-iron galettes, and draft ale. If you aren't in the culinary industry, I cannot fully translate what that phone call means. It is the equivalent of a local garage building a sedan in a backyard shed and winning a Formula One championship. That night, after the last dinner service ended and the doors were bolted, my crew broke down. Maya sat down on an overturned pickle bucket in the middle of the kitchen, pulled her apron over her face, and sobbed. Marcus bought 3 bottles of expensive champagne, poured it into heavy pint glasses, and didn't utter a single complaint about the cost. And what did I do? I drove to my mother's building on Park Avenue. I have never admitted this to another living soul until right now. I sat in my running car across the street from her doorman building for 45 minutes, with the heater blasting, rehearsing a speech in my rearview mirror, like a nervous schoolgirl holding a report card. Mom, I own the restaurant. I've owned it for years. And as of 5 o'clock today, we have a Michelin star. I practiced it 3 times. Then through the brightly lit second-floor window of her apartment, I saw her standing near her baby grand piano, holding a martini glass, talking on the phone. Her voice didn't need amplification. I could almost hear it through the glass. I remembered what she'd said to her sister on the phone the previous Thanksgiving when she thought I was in the bathroom. Oh, Nora. No, she's still at that tavern down by the docks. Bless her heart. Some people find their low ceiling early in life and just settle right in. I turned off the ignition. I sat in the dark interior of my car for 5 minutes. Then I restarted the engine, drove 40 minutes back across the Manhattan Bridge, walked into my kitchen and nailed the certificate to the wall right beside the dish machine, right where the people who bled for it could see it every single shift, and right where the people who would scoff at it would never ever find it. I told myself that keeping it hidden was an act of quiet dignity. A year passed before I realized what it actually was: fear wrapped in professional pride. Fear just stands up straighter when it's wearing a crisp chef's coat. The formal invitation arrived in early April, printed on heavy cream stock with lavender ink. Chloe and Preston were expecting a girl. The baby shower would be held on a Sunday afternoon at noon. Location: the Marble and Gilt. I stood at my kitchen pass during a busy Friday lunch rush and reread that location line 4 times, the Marble and Gilt, directly across the street from my tavern door. So close that I could literally watch their uniformed valets park Audis from my front bar stools. Of all the hundreds of dining establishments in the 5 boroughs of New York City, My family had managed to select the one building that shared a crosswalk with the secret I had guarded for nearly a decade. I saw the catastrophe immediately. If anyone on the staff at the Marble and Gilt recognized me, if any food rep, any distributor, any local cook saw Chef Ash walking into their dining room as a guest, the entire structure of my hidden life would implode in the most public room imaginable. I sat down in my small office and drafted a polite decline text. I typed it out. My thumb hovered over the send button. Then two things occurred in rapid succession. First, my mother called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She skipped greetings entirely. "Nora, darling," she said, her voice dripping like warm honey over gravel. "You'll handle the pastry trays for Sunday, won't you? As your shower gift to Chloe. Just 120 individual tarts. Nothing overly complex, lemon curd, perhaps, some white chocolate. You know your way around an oven. And frankly, the quote the Marble and Gilt gave us for catering dessert was simply extortionate. Not a guest being invited to celebrate a milestone. An unpaid kitchen vendor was handed an order invoice she was expected never to question. Second later that evening, Chloe posted the ultrasound image to the family group chat. A blurry gray and white scan of a tiny human life. My niece. I had made a silent vow to myself, standing beside my father's grave 19 years ago, that I would never be the family member who turned her back on a child. Whatever my mother was, whatever Chloe had become under her influence, that baby girl was innocent. So I erased the text. I picked up my phone and replied, "I'll handle the desserts, 120 pieces." Marcus heard the plan the next morning while he was stocking the bar taps. He stopped cold, holding a 50-liter keg of Brooklyn Lager, and stared at me as if I had just announced I was going to leap off the Manhattan Bridge. "Chef," he said in his flat, unyielding voice, "this ends in a disaster. You know that, right?" "It's just pastry, Marcus," I said, focusing on my prep list. "It's never just pastry with your family," he retorted. For the next 2 weeks, I had a front row seat to my own erasure. From my tavern bar stools, I watched trucks unload massive floral arrangements into the Marble and Gilt. On Thursday morning, two technicians on aluminum ladders hung a massive metallic gold banner across their upper glass balcony. "Welcome, Baby Montgomery," in 6-foot cursive script. The family group text became a relentless broadcast channel. Color palette: blush, champagne, and rose gold. Registry links: 3 separate luxury department stores. Then on Friday night, a direct text from my mother arrived on my phone. "Wear something plain and neutral on Sunday, Nora. And please wash your hair thoroughly. Fried food odor clings to garments so easily, sweetheart. You always seem to forget." I stood in the center of a kitchen that had earned an international culinary distinction. I was wearing a hand-tailored executive chef's jacket with my name, N. Vance, embroidered in charcoal thread over my chest. I read the text twice. I typed 3 different angry responses. I deleted all of them. Old habits well fed over 20 years do not die easily. Marcus asked if I wanted to shut down the Iron and Apron for Sunday morning, take the staff out for brunch, or go anywhere else in the city. "No," I told him firmly. "We open at 11:00 a.m. same as every Sunday. This pub doesn't lock its doors on account of my mother. It never has." What I didn't tell him, that I couldn't admit even to myself, was that some stubborn, bruised corner of my soul desperately wanted our lights on across the street. I wanted our doors unlocked, our cast iron pans hot, and our kitchen firing on all cylinders in the one building in New York where my name actually meant something. On Saturday night, I stayed late in the kitchen after the dinner service wrapped. I baked 120 white chocolate and passion fruit tarts, boxed them meticulously in pristine white pastry containers, and stacked them near the side door. Then I reached for the shelf above the stove. I pulled down my father's Griswold skillet. I had one more thing I wanted to bake. Actually, before we get to that skillet, there is one more detail you need to see, because it becomes crucial later. A week before the shower, Chloe had hosted a smaller registry brunch at her apartment in Midtown, a glass-walled high-rise with rented designer furniture and a panoramic view of the East River that she took great pains to highlight on her social media accounts. The registry itself read like a financial ransom note, a custom Danish baby stroller that cost more than my first commercial refrigeration unit, a silver-plated rattle from Tiffany's monogrammed silk crib sheets. Preston worked the room in a tailored linen shirt, pouring expensive Prosecco and repeating, "We are just so incredibly blessed," so many times it sounded like an involuntary tick. Twice during the afternoon, his phone buzzed violently. Both times his face tightened and he stepped out onto the narrow glass balcony to take the call. The second time from my position near the kitchen island, I could see his back through the glass door. You learn to read a person's shoulders when you've managed hotline cooks for 15 years. Those were not the relaxed, easy shoulders of a successful venture capitalist. Those were the hunched, rigid shoulders of a man watching a dam break. Later that afternoon, when I helped carry overflow gift boxes down to Preston's luxury German SUV in the basement parking garage, a manila folder slid out from under the driver's seat when he popped the trunk. It spilled onto the concrete floor. I bent down to pick it up. On top was a corporate lease default notice stamped in bright red ink. Third notice, immediate action required. Below it was an overdraft statement for a corporate credit card totaling nearly $80,000. I slid the papers back into the folder, placed it under the seat, and said nothing. It wasn't my marriage and it wasn't my business. But I filed the visual away the way a chef files away the faint smell of gas in a prep kitchen. Where exactly was the money for 6-foot gold banners, Italian marble venues, and Danish strollers coming from? It turned out somebody in the Vance family needed to start keeping receipts. That somebody was about to be me. The Thursday before the shower, I drove up to Park Avenue to drop off sample pastries because my mother insisted on tasting them prior to the event. Her local book club was gathering in the drawing room, 6 elderly women arranged on cream silk sofas like a judicial panel sipping iced tea. My mother took a single dainty bite of a passion fruit tartlet that my customers regularly pay $18 for, set it down on a linen napkin, and offered a tight smile. "Sweet," she declared. "A bit of homestyle, but it will suffice." Then she turned to her guests, gesturing toward me with her teaspoon. "This is my eldest, Nora. She helps out at a tavern down near the bridges. But she's always been quite clever with her hands. Helps out. 18 years of blood sweat, third-degree burns, and business management folded up as small as a cocktail napkin." One of the women, a woman named Barbara, wearing a massive turquoise ring and an air of unearned superiority, held her empty porcelain cup toward me and snapped her manicured fingers twice. Snap, snap. The exact cadence you would use to summon a stray dog in a park. "While you're up, dear," Barbara said, not even looking me in the eye. "More hot water." I stood there in my mother's drawing room, holding a silver tray of my own handcrafted food, and I looked directly at Eleanor Vance. I was waiting, I suppose, for some ancient motherly instinct to kick in. For her to say, "That is my daughter, not the waitstaff." Our eyes locked. And here is the bizarre, terrifying thing. For half a second, my mother's face drained of all color. Not an embarrassed blush. A dead, chalky white, as if every drop of blood had been siphoned out of her cheeks. Then the moment evaporated. She let out her shrill drawing-room laugh. "Nora doesn't mind at all," my mother chimed sweetly. "Nora, get Barbara her water, please." I refilled Barbara's cup. I smiled politely. I excused myself, walked down the carpeted hallway, took the elevator to the lobby, and drove back to Brooklyn with my hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. If you've ever made that kind of drive, the one where the car radio is playing loud, and you don't hear a single note of music for 40 miles, then you already know what was sitting in my passenger seat. A decision fully formed that was just waiting for the right temperature to bake. Sunday morning arrived with harsh, uncompromising sunlight, the kind of clear, cold spring day in New York where every smudge on a window shows up like an indictment. I put on a dark navy sheath dress, simple, tailored, entirely unadorned. No perfume per my mother's explicit written instructions. At 10:15 a.m., I stacked the 2 white pastry boxes along with the small tin box tied with red twine onto a foldable metal handcart. I waited for the pedestrian signal at Water Street, and I wheeled the cart across the 2-lane street from my faded green door to the Marble and Gilt's polished brass entrance. 40 seconds door to door. I had counted those steps 1,000 times from my bar stools, but I had never once made the crossing. Inside the Marble and Gilt was exactly as I had watched it from my bar stools for months. The brass easel with its gold calligraphy seating chart standing at the center of it all. 40 names arranged in neat aristocratic columns. I wheeled my cart toward the back service hallway because I know how commercial kitchens function. That was where the first crack in the illusion occurred. A young prep cook leaning against the dishroom doorway caught sight of me and went rigid. He tapped the shoulder of a line cook beside him, who looked up, blinked in total disbelief, and immediately darted into the main kitchen. 3 seconds later, the executive chef of the Marble and Gilt came out wiping his hands on a clean apron. He was a man in his late 30s, sharp-eyed, well-known in the city. He looked at me, looked at my cart, and his jaw subtly unhinged. He stared at me for a long moment, the way you stare at someone you've seen in a trade kitchen before but can't quite place. Then his eyes moved to the name embroidered on my bag strap, N. Vance. Something clicked behind his eyes. Chef Ash, he asked, his voice dropping an octave. Chef Ash from the Iron and Apron. In his tone was something my family's dining rooms had never once contained: genuine professional reverence. I placed one finger against my lips. "I'm just delivering the pastries for my sister's shower," I said quietly. He stared at me, then looked at the white boxes. "Chef, we use your roasted marrow bone technique on our winter menu," he whispered. "It's an absolute honor to have you in our building." He personally took the boxes from my cart with more delicacy than a curator handling museum glass. I thanked him, turned around, and walked back out into the main dining room to find my seat, foolishly believing that the chef's recognition would be the most dramatic moment of my morning. Then I reached the brass easel. I scanned the gold calligraphy list from top to bottom, twice. 40 names. Cousins from Connecticut. Preston's fraternity brothers from Dartmouth. Every woman from my mother's Upper East Side Bridge Club, including Barbara of the Snapping Fingers. No Nora Vance. No Chef Ash. I stood there long enough that the head hostess, a tall woman in a crisp suit, stepped over, looked at her digital iPad, scrolled down twice, and put on that trained face of corporate regret. "I am so sorry, ma'am," she said smoothly. "We don't seem to have a seat assigned for you on the final floor plan." Behind her, the party noise shifted. Chloe floated over in her blush chiffon dress, cradling her stomach, flanked by 3 bridesmaids. "Oh, Nora," Chloe said, letting out an airy, crinkling little laugh. "This is so terribly awkward. The private dining room has a strict fire code capacity of 40, and honestly, this crowd really isn't your scene anyway, is it?" She gestured vaguely toward the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, toward the cobblestones, toward my weathered pub, toward my entire life. "Why don't you try that dirty pub across the street? I hear it's much more your speed." A soft wave of laughter rippled through the chiffon-clad bridesmaids. My mother, materializing at Chloe's elbow with a glass of champagne, sealed the moment with her trademark church pew smile. "It suits you perfectly, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly. There it was. The two of them, framed by thousands of dollars in imported flowers, officially hand-delivering my station in life on a brass easel. Behind them, on a 5-tiered silver cake stand, my 120 passion fruit tarts sat in flawless geometric rows. A printed card beside the stand read "Desserts provided by the Marble and Gilt culinary team." Something inside my chest didn't snap. It settled, like a carpenter's level bubble sliding smoothly into the exact center of the glass. I looked at my mother, then I looked at my sister. I smiled with my entire face, a genuine, warm, effortless smile. "You're completely right," I said softly. "I'll do that." I reached into my bag, took out the small tin box tied with red butcher's twine, placed it quietly on the edge of the gift table, and said, "For the baby." Then I turned around, walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, and stepped out into the Brooklyn sunshine with 40 seconds of cobblestones stretching out ahead of me. You can process a vast amount of truth in 40 seconds, standing at the curb, waiting for the traffic light to change. I thought about every previous version of myself that had waited for a seat at that family table. The 17-year-old girl standing by a garbage dumpster in Queens with a 30-pound cast-iron skillet cradled in her arms. The 22-year-old line cook was standing in a Chicago walk-in freezer on Christmas Eve, taking a 3-minute phone call from her mother about the Westchester weather. The 35-year-old woman was sitting in a dark car on Park Avenue, practicing a speech in a rearview mirror, while her mother's laughter echoed through a second-floor window. 20 years. One long, exhausting, humiliating audition for a chair at a table that had never been built to hold my weight. The walk signal illuminated white. I stepped off the curb, and right there in the exact middle of Water Street, with the spring sun warming the back of my neck, the sentence I had been trying to compose my entire adult life finally completed itself. I stopped asking for a seat at their table the day I built my own. I just hadn't told them yet. What I had completely forgotten that had genuinely slipped my mind as I pushed open my oak door was that the front dining room of the Marble and Gilt was an entire wall of plate glass, offering an unobstructed wide-angle view of the street. I wasn't attempting to pull off a dramatic theatrical reveal. I was simply going to work. Those are two fundamentally different things. But through two sheets of plate glass across 40 feet of cobblestones, they looked identical. The brass bell over my green door rang its cracked, familiar note. The moment I crossed the threshold, my entire floor staff did what they do every single Sunday morning at 10:45 a.m. "Morning, chef," Marcus called out from behind the bar, wiping down the mahogany without breaking stride. "Morning, chef," called out two servers folding linen napkins at table 4. Then Maya slid out through the swinging kitchen doors, holding my freshly laundered chef's coat over her arm. We were fully booked for noon service. "Chef, your whites," Maya said, holding the coat open for me like a matador. Embroidered in gold thread over the left breast pocket were the words, "N. Vance, Chef, Owner." I slid my arms into the sleeves, snapped the double-breasted cloth buttons into place down to my collar, and took my position at the pass. It took maybe 15 seconds. Every single second of it was entirely visible through those two glass facades. I didn't look across the street. Maya did. Her eyes drifted over my shoulder out the front window and her mouth curved into a slow, wicked grin. "Chef," Maya whispered softly. "There are about 20 people across the street pressing their faces against the glass like they're looking into an aquarium." Marcus glanced up from the taps. "The older lady in the pearls has her phone out. She's reading something on her screen to the rest of them." I learned later exactly what Barbara was reading to my mother on that phone screen. It was an article from New York Magazine's culinary section, published 6 months prior, "The Invisible Chef of Water Street: How Chef Ash Turned a 110-year-old Brooklyn Tavern into a Michelin-starred powerhouse Without Ever Printing Her Full Name on a Menu." Underneath was the line that local critics had been quoting all year: "Whoever Chef Ash is, she cooks like someone keeping a sacred promise." My mother, I am told, did not move for 3 full minutes. My sister's peach mimosa tipped over, soaking the front of her blush chiffon dress, and she didn't even reach for a napkin. Half the guests at the baby shower abandoned the gift table to stand at the window. Two of the women from my mother's bridge club walked over to the Marble and Gilt's hostess stand and asked in a whisper that was overheard by 3 waiters whether it was possible to cancel their dessert order and get a lunch table across the street. My cell phone began buzzing on the steel prep table beside me. "Eleanor Vance calling." I looked at the glowing screen, flipped the phone face down onto a cutting board, and called out my first ticket of the morning. "Order in table 6 2 duck galettes, 1 marrowbone fire." By the time we broke down the line after Sunday lunch service, my phone contained 19 missed calls, a voicemail box that had hit capacity, and a text thread from my mother that read like a hostage negotiation written entirely in capital letters. On Monday evening at 7:00 p.m. they arrived in person. The bell over the green door rang, and there they stood in my vestibule, my mother wearing her second-best pearl necklace, and Chloe wearing full repentance makeup, staring at the historic brickwork, the polished brass, and the framed reviews they had walked past for years without ever once crossing the street. My mother opened the conversation with the most extraordinary sentence I have ever heard in my life. I want you to listen to it carefully, because it reveals everything about how people like her operate. "Nora, why didn't you tell us? Not we are so sorry. Not we treated you horribly in front of 40 people. Why didn't you tell us?" With the entire weight of the sentence placed on us, as if my privacy were a cruel betrayal, and their 20 years of casual contempt were merely a natural reaction to bad weather. Chloe stepped forward, her hands clasped together. "Nora, this place is incredible. Everyone in Midtown is talking about it. Listen for the baby's sip and see party after she's born. We were thinking we could host it right here in your private dining room. Obviously, the family gets the insider discount, right?" 24 hours earlier, she had offered me a dirty pub across the street. Now she was trying to order the dirty pub like a private catering amenity. I poured 2 glasses of ice water, set them on the bar, and looked at them with total calm. "Our dining room is fully booked through October," I said evenly. "I can recommend a lovely private tea room up in Westchester." My mother's smile flickered, then instantly recalibrated. She reached across the polished mahogany, squeezed my forearm, a physical gesture I have no childhood memory of ever receiving, and beamed. We are just so terribly proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you had that Vance work ethic in you. I looked down at her hand resting on my white chef's sleeve. I noted how quickly the praise arrived once the achievement was verified by third parties. The apology itself, of course, never arrived at all. I want to show you the version of this story I almost executed. Later that week, Marcus floated a plan over our Tuesday inventory meeting, his face as flat and dry as a tax return. "Here's what we do, chef," Marcus said. "Invite your mother and Chloe for a 6-course tasting menu at the chef's table. Let them sit down. Then make them wait at the host stand for 2 hours while we seat every walk-in customer ahead of them. Full circle, poetic justice." Maya clapped her hands in delight. "No chairs for them at the table, chef, that is absolute poetry. I won't pretend it didn't sound sweet." I sat at my desk that night and drafted the invitation text: "Mom, Chloe, dinner at the Iron and Apron this Saturday at 8:00 p.m. Wear something plain." I held my thumb over the send button for a long, quiet minute. Then I deleted the draft. I deleted it because my mother's entire existence ran on one vicious, archaic machine. Decide who matters. Arrange the chairs to prove it. Let the seating chart do the herding. If I lured her into my restaurant just to leave her standing by the coat rack, I wasn't destroying that machine. I was buying it. I was just becoming the new operator of the exact same equipment. Everything I had built in that tavern, my father's legacy, the door propped open with an iron brick for anyone who needed a meal. The culture of respect in my kitchen would become nothing more than a cheap prop in her continuing soap opera. No, whatever I was going to do about my family, it wasn't going to be performance art with better lighting. So I did nothing. I instructed Marcus to answer their phone calls politely, inform them that our reservation book was open to the public on Open Table, and leave it there. I bought a mid-priced machine-washable cotton onesie from Chloe's registry, had it shipped directly to her apartment, and waited. The collapse arrived 10 days after the shower. It unraveled the way financial catastrophes usually do in New York, quietly at first, then all at once on a public street. The Marble and Gilt's events manager called Chloe regarding the unpaid balance for the baby shower. 40 guests imported peonies harpist. The corporate credit card Preston had provided had been declined. Not overdrawn, cancelled. It belonged to a logistics shell company that had been legally dissolved the previous November. 2 days later, a flatbed tow truck arrived in front of their midtown apartment building and repossessed Preston's luxury German SUV. And Preston himself suddenly developed an urgent, non-negotiable schedule of investor meetings in Miami, the kind of meetings you travel to with 3 heavy suitcases and a turned-off cell phone. Chloe called me on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I will remember the tone of that phone call for the rest of my life, because in 29 years, my sister had never once dialed my number simply to speak to me. She was sobbing so hard she could barely articulate the words. "The card, the car, the apartment lease," she gasped. "Nora, the landlord, put a 3-day vacate notice on the front door this morning." Then she stopped, caught her breath, and uttered the foundational sentence our mother had programmed into both of us since childhood. "Please, please don't tell Mom. She can't have people knowing about this." People knowing. Her husband had vanished. Her financial life was in ruins. Her child was due in 6 weeks, and her primary instinct under her instinct was to manage the audience. "Breathe, Chloe," I told her quietly. "Eat something warm. If it gets worse, call me." After I hung up, I stood at my office window for a long time, looking across Water Street at the Marble and Gilt's glass facade. The gold banner had been taken down, but the faint rectangular ghosts of the mounting tape were still visible on the glass. My mother, of course, already knew. Her response to the crisis was operational silence. She skipped her Upper East Side Bridge Club 2 weeks in a row. She withdrew from the executive committee of her local garden restoration fund. In her social circle, that was the equivalent of firing a red flare into the night sky. Her friends knew. Barbara of the Snapping Fingers had a nephew who worked in commercial debt collection. The gossip circulated. The invitations to dinner parties stopped arriving. At 61 years old, Eleanor Vance was discovering the mechanical reality of the very door she had spent her life operating. It swings both ways. Then came a foggy Tuesday night at 11:00 p.m. The kitchen was closed. The floors were mopped. Marcus had gone home. A quiet knock sounded against the locked glass panel of my front door. I looked through the glass and saw a solitary figure standing on the wet cobblestones under the streetlight. My mother, alone. wearing no pearls, no designer coat, holding her leather handbag against her stomach with both hands like a woman waiting for a late-night subway train. I unlocked the oak door and pulled it open. She walked in, sat down stiffly on a tall wooden bar stool, and looked around the empty room. I realized with a sudden pang of strange realization that I had never in my 36 years seen my mother sit inside a bar. She stared at the exposed brick, at the brass beer taps, at the old black and white photograph of Gus Kowalski hanging behind the register. "You keep a very clean establishment, Nora," she said softly. Coming from Eleanor Vance, that was a full military salute. I didn't answer. I poured her a glass of sparkling water and waited. Her hands smoothed the leather of her purse twice. Then my mother said something I had waited my entire adult life to hear, though it arrived through a story I had never imagined. "There is something I never told you or Chloe about the years before your father died," she said, her voice dry and flat. "I need you to understand why I cannot abide the smell of a commercial kitchen." She talked for nearly 40 minutes. I am going to give you her words exactly as she delivered them, plain stripped of drawing room theater. "When my father was working double shifts at the Queen's Diner, and money was dangerously tight, my mother took a part-time job working banquet shifts at a private country club in Westchester. She was 22 years old, pretty and broke. She said the word broke as if it had jagged edges. One Saturday afternoon during a Mother's Day luncheon, she was serving a table of wealthy women her own age. One of the women wanted her tea refilled. She didn't speak. She simply raised her hand and snapped her manicured fingers twice. Snap, snap. My mother turned around with the silver teapot, put on a professional smile, and poured the water because her tips paid our apartment rent that month. And standing in the open doorway of the banquet hall on an elementary school field trip were her two young daughters watching their mother obey a finger snap like a trained animal. "You don't remember it," my mother said softly, looking down at her glass. "You were 4 years old, but I remembered it every single day of my life." Every night after those shifts, she said she would scrub her yellowed waitress uniform in the bathroom sink until her knuckles bled. Swearing an absolute oath over that soapy water, "My daughters will sit at those tables. My daughters will never ever carry the teapot." "When your father died on that diner floor," she whispered, "I looked at his greasy aprons in the closet and I felt like I was suffocating. I wasn't trying to erase him, Nora. I was trying to burn the uniform. And then, 6 months later, you went into the alley, pulled his iron skillet out of the trash and built your entire life around it. Every time I looked at you in the kitchen, I saw myself back in that country club banquet room, and I couldn't bear it." She finished her water. I stood behind my bar looking at her. I understood finally the snapping fingers in her drawing room 3 weeks prior and why her face had gone deathly pale. She hadn't been ignoring my humiliation. She had been drowning in her own ancient ghost. I want to be precise here. What my mother handed me that Tuesday night was an explanation. But an explanation is not an absolution. "Thank you for telling me that, Mom," I said quietly. My hands rested flat against the mahogany counter. "But I ran an extraordinary kitchen for 5 years, and you introduced me as a girl who helps out at a bar. 3 weeks ago, there was no chair for me at a table where my own handmade food was being served under another restaurant's label. Understanding where the knife came from doesn't pull it out of my back." She flinched. For the first time in my life, Eleanor Vance had no counter-argument. She sat in the quiet of my pub, surrounded by the smell of aged pine and copper polish. "What would you have me do, Nora?" she asked, her voice small and brittle. "Don't perform," I told her. "That's all. Stop arranging the chairs." She nodded once, picked up her purse, and walked out into the Brooklyn night. That brings us to the torrential Saturday night in mid-April, the 24th anniversary of my father's death, the 1-year anniversary of our Michelin star, and the exact deadline Gus Kowalski's lawyer had set for my commercial property loan to close. Everything I had worked for 18 years to build was crammed into one 12-hour window. The weather was brutally cold, driving East Coast rain that flooded the gutters along Water Street. But inside the iron and apron, the energy was electric. We were running a special menu feature, Frankie Vance's Peach Skillet Galette 14. A major national television network was filming an episode of Hidden Culinary Treasures in our dining room. Thick black cables ran along our baseboards, and a high-definition camera with a glowing red tally light was mounted directly above table 6. In addition, two critical reservations were booked for the 8:00 p.m. seating my commercial loan officer from the bank, who was coming to verify the restaurant's operational volume before signing off on the final building purchase, and an anonymous foretop that my sous chef Maya swore was a Michelin inspector conducting our annual reevaluation service. If we passed tonight, the building was mine, the star was secured, and the national television broadcast would air to 3 million viewers in the fall. At 7:45 p.m., the kitchen was at maximum velocity. Tickets were pulling off the printer in a steady rhythmic hiss. Pans were searing, wine glasses were clinking, and the red light on the camera above table 6 burned like a small bright eye. Then came 3 sharp knocks against the heavy metal door leading out to the rear alleyway. Marcus stepped out to check it. 3 seconds later, he returned, his face grave, rain dripping from his shoulders. "Chef," he whispered, leaning close to my ear. "It's your sister. She's out in the alley. She's in bad shape." I stepped through the rear door into the narrow brick-walled alleyway. Chloe was standing under the bare security bulb in the pouring rain. She was 8 months pregnant, wearing no coat, soaked to the skin, her hair plastered across her face, mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. In her trembling hands, she held a crumpled piece of paper. A handwritten note from Preston, left on their apartment counter before he boarded a flight to Costa Rica. "He took everything, Nora," Chloe choked out, sinking against the wet brick wall. "The bank accounts, the savings, everything is gone. I went to Mom's, but she wouldn't open the door because her bridge friends were over. She told me through the intercom to handle it quietly." She looked up at me, her body shaking violently from the cold. "I did this to you," Chloe sobbed, clutching her stomach. "In the shower. I didn't give you a chair because you make me feel so small. You always have. You built a real life and I built a house out of cardboard. And now I have nowhere to go." Behind me, through the heavy metal door, my kitchen was roaring. The order bell rang twice, ding ding. Maya's voice echoed through the pass. "Course 4 for table 6 needs chef to expedite." The loan officer was sitting at table 2, watching the kitchen pass with a pen in her hand. The camera over table 6 was recording. My future 12 years of sacrifice, ownership of the brick warehouse, and national validation was waiting for me inside that room. And standing in the freezing rain in a filthy alleyway was a broken, frightened girl holding her unborn child. I had exactly 3 seconds to decide who I was. I took a deep breath of the cold rain air. I stepped back inside the kitchen, pulled off my embroidered chef's coat, lifted it over my head, and placed it gently over Maya's shoulders. The entire kitchen went dead silent. The sizzle of the line seemed to drop an octave. "You're expediting tonight, Maya," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Course 4 goes out under your hands. The Michelin inspector eats your food tonight. You've been ready for 2 years. Maya looked at the gold thread on the jacket pocket, then looked into my eyes. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, chef," Maya said, stepping up to the pass with total authority. I walked over to the television producer standing near the bar. "We're wrapping the filming for tonight," I said politely. The producer blinked in shock. "Nora, are you insane? This is a national broadcast window. You walk away now and we cut this segment entirely. There are contracts." "I know," I told her quietly. "Send me the penalty paperwork on Monday." "My sister is freezing in my alley," I told her quietly. "This kitchen is not a film set. Pack your cameras." Then I walked over to the range, grabbed my father's cast-iron Griswold skillet by its worn handle, pulled a warm peach galette off the pastry rack, and walked out into the alley. I brought Chloe through the rear hallway and into my small back office just off the kitchen pass. My line cooks, men and women I had trained for years, didn't stare, didn't whisper, and didn't slow down their service by a single second. Their manners were a reflection of mine. I sat Chloe down at the small wooden table in my office, the same battered surface where I signed every invoice, every payroll sheet, every loan document that built this place. I set my father's Griswold skillet in front of her. I placed a slice of the warm peach galette on a white plate, set a silver fork beside it, and placed my father's photograph next to the plate, Frankie Vance standing at his Queen's diner, flat top, laughing, holding a spatula like a conductor's baton. "Eat," I told my sister gently. "Nobody leaves my table hungry, not even the ones who hurt me." Chloe looked at the photograph. She looked at the cast iron pan. Then she picked up the fork and took a bite of her father's recipe. So began to cry, not the loud, dramatic sob of a spoiled child, but the quiet, deep, cleansing weeping of someone whose defenses have completely collapsed. "It tastes like when we were little," she whispered. "It tastes like Dad." Standing there in my kitchen, watching my sous chef run my pass with absolute precision, watching my sister eat my father's food, watching the red light on the television camera go dark. I finally saw the framed Michelin certificate beside the dish machine for what it really was. It wasn't a sacred relic. It was a weapon I had been hoarding in a drawer, a piece of paper I had saved up for a judgment day when I could finally hurl it in my mother's face. I had spent 20 years measuring my worth using my mother's tape measure, just reading it from the opposite end. I let go of the tape measure, all of it, for good. Every choice in life comes with an invoice. Let me give you mine fully itemized, because stories that pretend choices are free are lying to you. The television producer kept her word. The national broadcast segment was canceled, and the time slot was given to a seafood restaurant in Charleston. Without the instant visibility of a national broadcast, my commercial bank declined the expedited loan application. On Monday morning at 9:00 a.m., I sat in Gus Kowalski's lawyer's office, and I signed a traditional longer-term owner financing agreement directly with Gus. It meant no immediate expansion. The second location I had sketched on napkins, the outdoor patio, the dedicated bakery counter, all of it was pushed 2 years down the road. I signed every page of the legal contract with a steady hand. Gus watched me slid the old brass keys of the warehouse across the desk into my palm, folded my fingers over them with his large calloused hands, and didn't say a single word, which from Gus was a 40-minute speech. And the anonymous four-top, the potential Michelin inspector who ate course 4 under Maya's command while I was in the alley with my sister. 3 months later, the new edition of the Michelin Guide was published. The Iron and Apron kept its star. Whether the inspector that rainy Saturday was one of several visits, or the final one we never knew, it didn't matter. Underneath our entry, the reviewer wrote a single new sentence: "The true test of an extraordinary kitchen is not how it performs when the master chef is standing at the pass, but the soul that remains on the plate when she steps away." On a crisp Sunday morning in late May at 6:00 a.m., a light knock sounded against my front green door. I looked through the glass and saw my mother. She was wearing plain blue denim jeans. In 36 years, I had never seen Eleanor Vance wear jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a simple elastic band, and her wrists were bare of jewelry. I opened the door. She stood on the wet cobblestones, her chin lifted with that stubborn Vance pride that no amount of tragedy could ever fully erase. "I still do not know how to say the word you asked for," she said, her voice trembling slightly in the morning air. "The word keeps catching in my throat. So, I would like to do something with my hands instead, if you will teach me." I didn't embrace her. She didn't reach for me. We are not a television movie. We are a real family, and real families heal in inches, not miles. I reached for a clean canvas apron hanging near the walk-in cooler, the plain, unadorned kind my entire prep crew wears, and held it up. My mother, who had thrown my father's skillet into a garbage dumpster 19 years ago, bowed her head quietly and let me loop the strap over her neck. I brought her to the wooden baker's bench. I showed her how to flour the board, how to fold laminated dough quarter-turn fold press, how the dough communicates with your palms when it has absorbed enough butter. She was awful at it. Her folds were crooked, her edges were jagged, and she got flour all over her dark sweater. She stayed anyway. 2 hours later, when the first tray of galettes came out of the deck oven, lopsided, imperfect, and deep golden brown, my mother looked at what her hands had created. I looked at her, at the flour dusted across her cheek, at her pearls sitting home in a drawer on Park Avenue, and I gave her back her own line wiped, completely clean of malice. "It suits you perfectly, Mom." My mother let out a soft laugh, wiped her nose with the back of her flour-stained hand, and whispered, "I am so sorry, Nora. Here is where everyone landed, because you have earned the full accounting." Chloe moved into the small second-floor loft apartment above my pub the week her Midtown lease defaulted. She took over our business bookkeeping 3 mornings a week. She framed her first paycheck from the Iron and Apron and hung it above her desk like a college diploma. Preston remains in legal limbo in Florida. His corporate attorneys are handling the bankruptcy proceedings, and my sister's divorce was finalized in July. My mother lost her seat in the Upper East Side drawing rooms. Barbara and her circle found a new vice chair for the garden fund, and the social calendar closed over Eleanor's absence like water behind a boat. That world was never constructed to miss anyone. Across Water Street, the Marble and Gilt continues to operate. Their valets sprint, their peonies arrive fresh on Tuesday mornings, and their waiting list remains long. I can't fix the world of luxury dining, and I have stopped billing my soul for its existence. On a warm Sunday afternoon in early July, my niece arrived into the world, 7 pounds 4 ounces healthy and loud. Chloe named her Frances Frankie for daily use. On the first Sunday after, Frankie came home from the hospital. The Iron and Apron closed its doors to the general public for the only time all year. We dragged 3 extra wooden leaves out of storage and added them to the big staff table in the center of the dining room. My entire crooked, beautiful family sat down together. Maya, Marcus, Gus on a FaceTime call from Arizona. Chloe holding baby, Frankie and my mother passing the roasted potatoes. There was a chair for everyone. There was a chair to spare, actually. I keep one empty chair at the head of that wooden table on purpose now. And every single Sunday, without fail, somebody stumbles in off the cobblestones of Water Street, a hungry stranger, a tired line cook from across the street, a traveler looking for a warm meal and fills it. I spent 20 years trying to earn a seat at a table that didn't want me, and one rainy Saturday giving my own chair away. Here is what that trade taught me. Your worth was never something you had to prove to people who refused to look at you. Your worth is something you cook into the world anyway, with your own hands in your own time on your own terms, until the people who actually matter find their way to your kitchen. That's my story. One missing chair, one 40-second walk across a Brooklyn street, and a table that never runs out of room. If you've ever been the member of your family they refuse to see, build your own table anyway, and set it proudly. If someone came to your mind while you were listening to this, share this story with them today. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next story.